Hey guys, and welcome to a different type of video here on my channel. Today I am doing a Premier League predictions of the 2020-2021, which is like the most annoying thing to say, Premier League predictions. Obviously with lockdown and coronavirus, the season is starting a little later than it was, about a month later than it would normally start. And obviously with the whole lockdown thing, no fans, kind of a crazy transfer market with the whole financial situation in the world. It's got all of the ingredients for a very, very interesting season ahead. Obviously with Liverpool trying to retain their Premier League trophy, the first one in 30 years, but the pack is going to be chasing. We've seen Man City and the players they bought. We've seen Chelsea and the crazy things they're doing. But not going to give away too much. We're going to go through each team alphabetically. I'm going to give you a little bit of a view from my perspective of what I think lies in store for that team this season, and then more importantly where I think they'll finish in the league. So before I jump into that, guys, make sure to subscribe if you're not already. I post a ton of football and Premier League content here on the channel, so go check some of it out if you haven't already, and if you have, what are you doing? Hit the sub button if you haven't already. So let's jump into it. So first up is Arsenal. Obviously last season they finished in 8th position, which was a bit of a disappointment, but they've had a very, very up and down season. Obviously with the highlights of their season kind of not being good things, with Emery being sacked and kind of the whole Xhaka situation, everything that was going really, really wrong at Arsenal at the beginning of the season, to moving over under the reins of Mikel Arteta, where we really saw Arsenal take some steps forward towards the end of the season, obviously culminating in them winning the FA Cup with a great performance both against Manchester City and then Chelsea in the final. So the story of their last season was very, very up and down, and I kind of maybe predict something along those similar lines for this season. The defence has been their Achilles heel for the past couple of seasons, and Arteta's tried to resolve this by bringing in Gabriel from Lille, and William Saliba as well, who was on loan last season, who's now coming back. But, you know, are they the big kind of centre-backs that Arsenal need to really push forward in the Premier League? That's what I don't think. I think obviously with Aubameyang and Lacazette up front, they will always continue to be a threat moving forward. But defensively, I think that will still be their Achilles heel. And they've obviously got the goalkeeping situation to contend with as well, with Martinez playing really, really well and Bernd Leno being injured but being the first choice. So I wonder how Arteta will handle that. And I think as the season goes on, I think more teams and managers will figure out how to play against Arteta, and that's when I think he'll kind of come a bit unstuck, being that unexperienced manager. And that's why for Arsenal, I'm going to be predicting they finish in 6th position. So next up is Aston Villa, who just about stayed in the Premier League last season. They finished in 17th position, and their highlight of last season was pretty much staying up. That was all they kind of wanted to do when they came up. Dean Smith and John Terry did actually a pretty good job with a kind of a not that good team, a very average team, other than kind of Jack Grealish and maybe Tyrone Mings. There aren't very many decent players in that Aston Villa team, so I think they did really, really well with the players they had to stay up. Obviously, in looking forward to this season, I think again it will be very, very tough. Obviously, keeping Grealish and kind of keeping some of the big teams away from him has been a huge coup for them during the summer break between the two seasons. They're also trying to look to sign Ollie Watkins from Brentford from the Championship. Lots of Premier League teams, particularly in that bottom half, are trying to sign him because they realise the importance of goals, right? When teams come up from the bottom, that's one thing they always struggle with, and that's exactly what Aston Villa struggled with. Samatta was okay, but not really good. Kieran Davis, very average for Aston Villa. But their biggest problem, like Arsenal we talked about just before, is leaking goals. They leak so many goals. I think they leaked the most goals in the Premier League last season, or second most goals conceded, which is just not going to cut it. And I don't think they've really done anything to address that, either in the transfer market. I don't really see things changing next season. That's why, unfortunately, Aston Villa fans, I'm going to be predicting relegation for you, and I think you'll finish. It'll be close, but I think you'll finish in 18th position. So next up, guys, is the Seagulls and Brighton and Hove Albion, kind of a group of Premier League teams that are kind of in the middle of nowhere. Like they could easily fall into that type of relegation threat like we saw with Bournemouth this past season, but actually kind of hover around that 10th to 16th mark most seasons, not really progressing but not going backwards, i.e. to the Championship. So for them that's a success, and obviously finishing 15th last season was a pretty good coup for them. You know, they kind of tailed off a bit towards the end of the season, but Graham Potter did really, really well particularly the beginning of the season, to get them solidly defensively. We talked about Aston Villa just before and how they conceded so many goals, but Brighton are a lot more solid defensively, and that's why I think they were kept safe ultimately at the end of the season. In terms of highlights from last season, I honestly couldn't think of any. As I said, Brighton are one of those teams that kind of just a bit average. No highs, no lows, but just average, which I guess works for them. I guess if I was to pick one highlight, I would say the Neal Maupay goal against Arsenal. That was just like savage, and the whole situation around it was so hilarious. I guess that would be their highlight of the season. But looking forward, I think they haven't really made any signings, so I think they're kind of content with the team they have. And I would say their team is probably good enough. I think one area they will struggle in, again, as we talk about, is goals. Glenn Murray's obviously getting on now, and he isn't the player he was maybe a couple of seasons ago where he could get those 10 to 15 goals a season. But one player I do think we should look out for is Leandro Trossard, a player that we saw kind of emerge more throughout last season. Neal Maupay as well, another player who really emerged last season. I think they'll be a really big threat in the Premier League this season, or a big enough threat to mean that Brighton, I don't think, will get caught up into a relegation battle, which is why I'm going to be predicting that Brighton and Hove Albion finish 15th. So next up is Burnley. Again, another team that doesn't have too many highs, but definitely doesn't have too many lows. And staying in the Premier League obviously is their ambition. They haven't got the big money to go out spending or anything like that. And finishing 10th last season was a really, really good coup for them. And just plaudits out to Sean Dyche and the players. I talked about this in numerous episodes and videos of mine before, but I think that team really understands their identity. They really understand who they are, the way they want to play, and the way they will succeed. They don't try and be something else. They don't try and be, what they think fans want to see or whatever. They're true to themselves, and I think that's really, really well played and really, really well managed from Sean Dyche. I think in terms of signings for the season, in terms of looking forward, obviously they've kept Ben Mee, signing him to another contract, which is big for them. He's been a really, really big rock at the back alongside Tarkowski for Burnley, and keeping him is definitely a big win. Also, Dwight McNeil, again, another player that maybe some of the kind of teams further up the table may have been looking at, but it looks like Burnley are going to keep hold of him, and I think that will be really, really good for his progression too. I think if he goes to a bigger team, he might get lost where he isn't the first choice, and his progression may kind of stifle a bit. But I think for him staying at Burnley, that would be a really, really good choice for him. In terms of looking forward to this season, then, I think their strike force of Chris Wood and Jay Rodriguez is a really, really good one. They really work well together, with Jay Rodriguez kind of working off Chris Wood's flicks, with him being, 6'5" or something. He is, Chris Wood. And obviously from set pieces, Burnley are always a threat. The amount of goals they scored from set pieces is just crazy, and they're one of the best teams at it. And every season, no team really figures out how to really play against it. I think for them this season, I think, as I said at the beginning of this little section, that they should continue to stay true to their identity, which I think they will do. But I guess one challenge that I'd like to throw out there for Burnley is to focus a bit more on the cups. They haven't really flirted or been threatened with relegation over the past couple of seasons, but at the same time, they haven't really kind of progressed well, making it to the semi-finals or final of a cup competition that I think that club really, really deserves. And I think the fans would completely get behind, and I think would be amazing to see as well. So I'm hoping this season they can put together a bit of a cup run, which will be really good for them. But that's why I think for me, I'm going to be predicting 11th place finish for Burnley. I would like them to, and I think they will. Sean Dyche might take a bit more of a punt on the Carabao Cup and the FA Cup as well, which may impact their Premier League performance a bit, but I don't think they'll be at risk of being relegated or anything like that. So 11th place, I think, would still be a very, very good finish for Burnley. So next up is the big spenders, and that is Chelsea, with Roman Abramovich seemingly not impacted or touched by coronavirus and lockdown. He's still got this cash to spread, and he's exactly been doing that. But before we talk about the signings he had, let's have a little bit of a review of Chelsea's season last season. Obviously, Frank Lampard coming in as a new manager, first time in the Premier League, first time back at his boyhood club, and things could go well, things could not go so well, and I think on the whole things went well. He finished in the top four, right? That was the only ask Abramovich or pundits or anyone could really say for Chelsea, and that's exactly what they did. They kind of stumbled across the line a little bit at the end, but they made it, so no problems there. And I think the biggest find they had last season was Christian Pulisic. Obviously, him coming in January, and throughout the second half of the season, he was immense. He was the type of player that we had, that Chelsea had when they had Eden Hazard. He was taking on people, he was running past players, he was making assists, he was scoring goals. Absolutely fantastic player. And I think I'm really, really excited to see, I'm not a Chelsea fan, obviously, but really, really excited to see what he does in the Premier League this season, because I think he could be one of the Premier League young players to watch out for, one of the greats in terms of young players in the Premier League. In terms of who Chelsea have signed, I'm actually going to have to look at a list because I genuinely can't remember everyone they signed. So Thiago Silva, Ben Chilwell, Timo Werner, Hakim Ziyech, Malang Sarr, and possibly Kai Havertz on top of that. Do you realise how ridiculous that is? Not even given this transfer window with coronavirus and the whole economic situation, but given any transfer window, Chelsea are acting and moving like it was 2013 when people were paying stupid amounts of money. And it's crazy to think that, one, they've been able to actually get all these players in terms of attracting them to Chelsea. And then the second thing is just affording all of these players. These guys are big name players. They're going to be on some serious wages. And it's not like Chelsea have been clearing out a load of people. Yes, they've maybe got rid of some younger players who they'd loaned out for many seasons, but they're not really getting rid of any players. So, I'm not sure what they're doing to their wage bill. I'm sure the old financial fair play gods will be circling around Chelsea to figure out what on earth is going on there. But that kind of leads me to what I predict for this season for Chelsea. And I think just merging all of those players is going to prove really, really difficult for Frank. Even though they are all top-class players, they're not buying any players that, aren't proven. Every single one of these players has played at the highest level and has performed amazingly at the highest level, and they're all pretty much at their peak. So Frank's got to get them performing straight away. There's going to be no warming up period. There's going to be no grace if things don't start so well for Frank Lampard. The pressure is on him now from day one. I think he knows this, right? By getting into this situation, when you spend that much money, the pressure's on from day one, and I think that's what's going to be really interesting to see how Frank Lampard handles. Obviously, managing that with the Champions League as well, but he's got a lot of Champions League experience as well. He's got Thiago Silva, who obviously made it to the final this year, Hakim Ziyech, who was in the semi-final last year. So he's got a lot of Champions League experience, so I'm sure Abramovich will be targeting a lot of Champions League success this year, making it through to the latter rounds. And that's why, for me, I think because of that pressure on Frank Lampard, I think they still will do well just because of just sheer amazing players they have in their team now. I think they will finish third in the Premier League. I think that's fair. I don't think they're going to challenge the likes of Liverpool and Manchester City just because of that whole team gelling dynamics situation, but I think third place is realistic for them. So next up is Crystal Palace, the Eagles, and last season they finished 14th place. Another team that really kind of is on an even keel, no highs and lows for them really from last season. I think defensively they were fairly solid. I think attacking wise, I think Jordan Ayew had a really, really good season and took some of that burden off Wilfried Zaha. We see, whenever you watch Crystal Palace play, it feels like they just give the ball to Zaha and then expect something to happen. And I think with Jordan Ayew picking up some more of that slack, it drags some defenders away, lets Zaha have a bit more space to showcase his skill and talent. In terms of signings this season, obviously the major signing Crystal Palace have made is for Eberici Eze from the Championship. A couple of the teams towards the bottom of the Premier League, I believe, were looking at him, but Crystal Palace won out. I think that's probably a good move for him. We saw Ruben Loftus-Cheek why can't I say his name? His name is not even that difficult to say. Ruben Loftus-Cheek. When he went there, he did fairly well. And I think Eberici Eze, who plays in a very similar position, could do really well. And I think that kind of front attacking of Eze, Zaha and Ayew could actually be really, really successful for Crystal Palace this season. And I think, for me, have they done anything or have they bought any players, or do I think they're going to do anything to really push on and progress from this season? No. But I think they're still very solid defensively, and I think the addition of Eze will be really, really positive for them. And that's why I'm going to be predicting 12th place for Crystal Palace. So next up, guys, is Everton. And last season was very topsy-turvy, almost a very similar situation to Arsenal, but just a little bit worse. At the beginning of the season, they were really under threat of possibly going down, seriously under threat. They were they were absolutely abysmal. And they got a huge coup in picking up Ancelotti and attracting Ancelotti to Goodison Park. And he transformed that team. Like, no word of a lie. He genuinely transformed that team. Obviously, the FA Cup defeat against Liverpool was not his greatest moment. But in terms of where they ended up finishing in the Premier League, where they finished 12th, it could have been a lot worse. And yeah, I think Ancelotti did a fabulous job. Obviously, Leighton Baines has now retired as well, a player that was so key to that kind of David Moyes, Roberto Di Matteo. Was it Roberto Di Matteo? I can't even remember. But at least the David Moyes era where Leighton Baines was one of the best left-backs in England. He's obviously retired now. But, they got Luca Dean, who's a very good left-back. And in terms of signings, well, it's been rumoured, although they haven't really made any official signings, it's been rumoured that they might get James Rodriguez, who's obviously been floating between Real Madrid and Bayern Munich for the past couple of seasons and has become a little bit lost. Like a Philip Coutinho, has kind of come a bit lost, went to the bigger team, wasn't good enough to make it at the bigger team, and has kind of floated around a bit. And so it will be an amazing signing for Everton if they can pick up James Rodriguez. Like, obviously, a player that's performed amazingly at the World Cup, played at some of the biggest teams in the world. Obviously, Ancelotti would be a big draw for him. Not sure how much he'd enjoy living in Merseyside, but hey, I think that would be a fantastic signing for them. A much better, improvement on the likes of Gylfi Sigurdsson and Bernard. So in terms of looking forward to this season, I think for Ancelotti, it's very similar to an Arsenal situation where it's about continuing the rebuild. Dominic Calvert-Lewin and Richarlison looked fantastic towards the end of last season, and both of them playing together as a partnership, but also setting each other up, setting up goals for others. Richarlison in particular performing really well kind of once we came back from lockdown. So I think he's a great player. We know he's a great player. It's just to see whether he can do it consistently throughout a season and against the bigger teams as well, which we maybe didn't see from him last season. And that's why for me, I'm going to be predicting a 9th place finish for Everton. I think defensively they're pretty solid. Ancelotti will get them working well, and I think Calvert-Lewin and Richarlison will have fantastic seasons. So next up, we have the first promoted team. We have Fulham coming up again to the Premier League. Obviously, they've been up the past couple of seasons, or a couple of seasons ago, and things maybe didn't go so well in the Premier League. But obviously, last season for them, the main challenge and task was to try and get promoted. Scott Parker did a really good job, like a seriously good job. Like, the Fulham team is good, but they've underachieved for so many years with a very similar squad to the one he has, be it when they were in the Premier League or be it when they got dropped down to the Championship and maybe didn't make the cut. But they did get promoted, they won the playoffs, and fair play to them and fair play to Scott Parker. In terms of signings, they're trying a slightly different strategy to the last time they came up to the Premier League, where they spent millions and millions buying all these random players from around the world that had no Premier League experience, were kind of mainly unproven at the highest level, and it really just didn't work out for them. They were left with a huge wage bill that they just couldn't sustain when they did get relegated and go down to the Champions League. So this time they're trying down to the Champions League. What are you saying, Kieran? Down to the Championship. But this time around, they're trying something a little bit different. So far, they've only made one signing. That is Anthony Robinson from Wigan. Again, I don't think he'll be a first-choice player, but maybe a good squad player for someone like Fulham. I guess obviously keeping Mitrovic as well is a big coup for them. He is a great player. We've seen him in the Premier League. We've seen what he can do to defenders at an international level as well when he plays for Serbia. So he's going to be a big player for them as well. It's just can he get enough goals, basically, is going to be the question to keep Fulham up. And I think the answer to that is no. I think defensively they'll struggle, and I think Scott Parker will have a tough time this season. Unfortunately, as I said, I think he did really well in the Championship, but for me, and the way I see Fulham play and their history in the Premier League, unfortunately for me, I think they're going to get relegated again, and I think they'll go down in 19th position. I think it really will be a tough season for Fulham, and I'll be interested to see whether, if things do go bad, whether Fulham decide to stick with Scott Parker. We've seen the Fulham hierarchy in the past abandon managers and try and change things in middle of the season to see if they can try and kind of get that new manager boost. But yeah, I think I'm predicting it's going to be a really tough season for Fulham. So next up is the other promoted, or the second promoted team of this little Premier League prediction. That is Leeds United, obviously finally making the jump up to the Premier League. I feel like it's been on the cusp for so long. For the last like 3 or 4 seasons, it's always been, are Leeds going to make it up? Are Leeds going to make it up? And they bottled it in the past. They nearly bottled it again this time, but this time they had too much of a lead at the top of the table and they were promoted. So I'm really excited to see Leeds in the Premier League. I think a lot of people are. Leeds is a great club with a lot of history. Obviously, a lot of people kind of my age remember when they were previously in the Premier League with the likes of Mark Viduka, Harry Kewell and those guys. Those were really, really good. That was a really, really good Leeds team. And I think we're all kind of excited. The fans are great up at Leeds as well, up at Ellen Road. And so I'm sure all the teams will be looking forward to going up there to play Leeds United at Ellen Road. In terms of signings, they've obviously made one very, very big signing. And this signing, I think, could have a huge role to play in terms of their safety, and that is signing Rodrigo from Valencia. Again, a striker who has proven to score goals at the highest level in La Liga. Obviously not at Premier League level. I think it'd be very difficult for them to pry a 20-goal type striker from the Premier League, but taking someone like Rodrigo from La Liga, like a team like Valencia, I think is really, really big for Leeds. And I think, as we talked about with some of the other teams and some of the other promoted teams in the past seasons, that goals seems to be the thing that they really struggle with. Obviously, defensively, you've got to be strong as well because the Premier League strikers just are better. But in terms of goals, a lot of promoted teams really struggle to score a number of goals. We've seen it in the past with the likes of Cardiff and teams like that who can't find a striker to get their goals, and I think Rodrigo will be that man for Leeds. And obviously seeing Biesler in the Premier League, this is going to be amazing. Biesler's obviously one of those managers that cuts opinion. The way he plays cuts opinion as well, and he's just a very controversial manager, and that's what we love to see in the Premier League, right? We've got Mourinho, we've got Klopp, we've got Pep. We love controversial managers here. It makes everything a lot more interesting, and I'm sure he'll relish the opportunity of playing and managing his Leeds team into this Premier League season. And it's been so long since they've been in the Premier League. I think that obviously with any promoted team, the aim is just to try and stay up, and that's exactly what I think they'll do. That's why I predict that Leeds United will be finishing 17th. So next up is the Premier League winners from a couple of years ago, the Foxes, Leicester City, finishing 5th last season, which doesn't really tell the story because they were pretty much 3rd the entire season until they bottled it after we came back from lockdown. The highlights of their season obviously was that Southampton win, the one away 9-0, which probably did more for Southampton than it did for Leicester. Leicester seemed to go on a downward trajectory since then, and Southampton was the complete opposite. Vardy obviously winning the Golden Boot at 33 was a big win for them. It's crazy to think that he's still banging in goals at that age. And he will obviously be huge again to them this season because the drop off from Vardy into Iheanacho is actually quite large. Iheanacho was someone that came in with quite a lot of promise because he'd shown a lot of promise when he was back at Manchester City, but maybe it's the way how Brendan Rodgers plays him or whatever, but he just really hasn't hit the heights that many of us expected he would hit. And so I think a lot of the goal scoring burden will be on Jamie Vardy this season. Obviously, with Ben Chilwell now going, they've got a big gap at left back, and Ben Chilwell was one of their best players. We saw some cracking goals from him last season, and we saw some really, really good play defensively as well from him. And they've been rumoured at possibly getting in Tagliafico from Ajax, who I think would be a really, really good signing if they're able to get him in. Again, another player who's proven it at the Champions League level, but they're obviously going to be in the Europa League, which I think Brendan will find a big challenge in terms of managing that alongside the Premier League. I think that in terms of signings, though, the biggest things for them is that they've been able to lock down James Maddison and Jamie Vardy to long-term contracts now, so that that their two best players are signed, sealed, delivered, and will be at the team. They don't have to worry about them being poached from a big team, particularly James Maddison. So I think that's a really, really big win for them. And if I look forward to next season, particularly James Maddison is one player I really, really want to see push on. We've seen the competition in that attacking midfielder position for England with Maddison, with even Dele Alli hopefully making a proper return this season, with Mason Mount, with Eze now even putting his name into the hat, now moving into the Premier League. And Ross Barkley as well. There's lots of players in that position, but I actually think James Maddison is the best of them. But I don't think we've necessarily seen that. And which is why I want to see him really progress and push on this season. So that's why my prediction for Leicester City is that they're going to finish 8th position. I think the reason I say that is just the management of the Europa League and the Premier League. I think it will be very tough. Defensively, again, they've looked decent, but particularly towards the end of last season, they looked very, very suspect with Evans, Bennett and Soyuncu getting exposed a little bit too much. And it'll be interesting to see how Brendan approaches that at the beginning of this next season. So next up is my team, is Liverpool FC. Obviously, last season was just an absolute madness and chaos. Obviously, it ended a little later than we would have wanted to, but it ended in the way that we would have wanted. And that is us, when Jordan Henderson lifting the Premier League trophy. And yeah, there's not really much else to say about last season. We rode away with the Premier League. No team really came anywhere close to us. And yeah. This season, the teams behind us, the teams chasing us, are going to have to really, really pull up their socks, because I think we'll be up there yet again. In terms of signings, obviously only one confirmed signing so far, and that is Kostas Tsimikas. We've been calling out for that. I've been calling out for that, for a good backup left back, an actual left back that is left-footed, not a James Milner or someone like that. So I think it's really, really good to see him. I've only seen bits and bobs of him in the pre-season games, so can't really ascertain. Obviously, he's still very new into the team, how good of a left back he will be. But he's come into the team talking big about how he wants to challenge Andy Robertson, and I think that'd be really good. I think obviously we've got Nico Williams challenging Alexander-Arnold on the right, and now we would have Tsimikas challenging Andy Robertson on the left. So I think that's really, really positive to see. Obviously, as well, we still have the possible transfer of Thiago. Like, I don't know what's going on with this saga. It's got a bit crazy now. Is he coming? Is he not coming? Do we need a player that old in that position? It's gone a bit crazy. And, yeah, who knows whether he comes. Personally, I don't think we need him. I think he offers something slightly different to Fabinho in that defensive midfielder position. But I think Fabinho does everything we need him to. He can be that playmaker. He can also play centre-back if we need. And he can also be that enforcer in the middle of the park that kind of just tackles and intercepts balls all the time. So I think the biggest question, obviously, for Liverpool and for Jurgen Klopp this season will be, can Jurgen Klopp keep the boys hungry? The season before, obviously, we just fell short, and kind of that hunger was there from the players, right? Just because we'd done so much, we'd worked so hard, but we still fell short. And so last season, the players really had that hunger in them to win the league. But now that we've got that kind of thing off our back, and we are Premier League champions, are the players and will the players still be hungry enough? And I think that will be a big question. I think the answer to that will be they will be fine. But you never know. Obviously, we are the ones to beat now. We are the Premier League champions. Every team will be coming to Anfield trying to beat us. We know how good we are at Anfield, because we were unbeaten at Anfield last season. So yeah, I'm predicting another very, very solid season for Liverpool. Obviously, not a lot of signings, but that whole team, that gelling that we talked about with Chelsea, that might not be there for Chelsea, 100% is there for Liverpool, and that's why for me, you might call this biased, but I think we are going to do back-to-back Premier League titles, and I think we are going to finish top of the league. All right, so next up is Manchester City, obviously finishing second place last season, and they kind of they were in a very tough position because they were too far away to really tackle Liverpool, and then they were miles ahead of the teams faffing around for third, fourth, and fifth and sixth position, and so they got into a bit of a no man's land where they actually didn't really know what they were playing for, and that's what actually I think led to a lot of their vulnerability last season. They just seemed like a very beatable team, and you might argue that that's because of Laporte was either injured or coming back, and maybe wasn't fully fit, and Aguero wasn't playing as much because of injury. But I think for me it was more just that they didn't have a reason to play. They didn't have a reason to play. With the Champions League being postponed, they were obviously just waiting for that to happen. But yeah, I think that was the reason for me why they looked so vulnerable last season, because they just didn't have anything to play for. But that's not going to be the case here this season. They've obviously made some good signings, with Nathan Ake in particular coming into the team, and possibly the man, the god, the myth himself, Lionel Messi, obviously having chosen to leave Barcelona now, might be coming to Manchester City. If that happens, I think it's KO for the whole Premier League. But because he hasn't come and that's not be confirmed, I'm doing my prediction based on what they have currently. And for me, I think they're going to finish in second place. And the reason I think they're going to finish second is because they've got a couple of things to really sort out this season. And I think one, that's defensively. I think if Laporte stays fit, I think that's a big win. But he's now got to form a partnership with Nathan Ake. They're both left-footed players. It's very rare that you see two left-footed centre-backs in a back two. And then I think more importantly and more pressingly for Manchester City is the striker situation. So Sergio Aguero's getting on now. He's not he's not a young spring chicken like he was before, and he's getting injured now more than he was before. And so that leaves them with Gabriel Jesus as their only other kind of striking option. And I don't think Pep is convinced by Jesus. He's played him many times and he does score goals. I'm not saying he doesn't score goals, but do I think Pep wants to put all of his eggs in Jesus' basket? I don't think that is the case. I think he'll experiment a lot this season with playing someone like Raheem Sterling or even a Kevin De Bruyne in that false nine position. And I think that'll be really interesting to see how that works, if it works for Manchester City. But they're going to be missing a lot of goals with Sergio Aguero out of the team. We've seen how important he's been in every season for Manchester City, and that's why for me I think they're going to finish second this season and fall short of Liverpool. So next up we have the Red Devils themselves, Manchester United, who finished third last season. Obviously at the beginning of the season with Solskjaer coming in, finishing the top four was always going to be the ask. Same of Chelsea. Both of those teams were very much on par in terms of what they were expecting from last season, and both teams achieved it, so fair play to them. I think the biggest find for them last season, though, was Mason Greenwood. Like, towards the end of the season, obviously post the restart, he was mega, like seriously mega, like showing up Marcus Rashford, showing up Anthony Martial. They were great too, but nothing on the level for me of Mason Greenwood. And I think he's really another exciting prospect. Obviously he's made it into Gareth Southgate's England team now as well, but someone that I want to see progress more and more throughout this season. In terms of signings, I think it's an interesting one. Obviously, they missed out on Jadon Sancho, so they haven't got that marquee signing that maybe they were hoping for. But they have got Dean Henderson, and although Dean Henderson obviously isn't a new signing, they've signed him down to a new contract, and he's now really going to put pressure on David De Gea. We've seen David De Gea make a number of mistakes, and I think Solskjaer is going to be brave enough that if David De Gea does make mistakes, that he will take him out and put Dean Henderson in. Yes, Dean Henderson made a couple of mistakes, but I think David De Gea probably made more mistakes over the course of last season than Dean Henderson did. And so I think Solskjaer will be brave enough, like we saw with Chelsea with the whole Kepa and Caballero situation, that he will rotate David De Gea and Dean Henderson. And I think that will be for the better for Manchester United. Obviously, in terms of looking forward to this next season, I think up front, solid. I think with Martial, he really kind of took on that centre forward position towards the end of last season, and I think he'll continue that through to this season. And Bruno Fernandes, again, another player who they signed who was just been absolutely mega for them since January, and again another player who I think will be instrumental to what I think will be a successful season for Manchester United this season. I think where they will struggle though is defensively. They struggled defensively anyway, and I really think, and unfortunately I think because of the whole Harry Maguire situation, I really do think that's going to play with his head. I do think Harry Maguire will be a shell of a player, hopefully not for the rest of his career, but I think he'll be like that this season. I think the ordeal he's going through is something that, I can't understand, and many of you guys watching probably won't understand. And it's not necessarily just what's happened in terms of the whole legal stuff, but how it affects you mentally, all that type of stuff. And I genuinely do think it will have a negative impact on his performances in the Premier League this season. And that's why, for me, I think they're actually going to take a little bit of a step backwards and finish in fourth position. So next up, it's the Toon Army. It's Newcastle United, and finishing 13th last season was actually a really good season for them. I think when Steve Bruce came in, there was obviously a lot of animosity towards him with his allegiances and ties to Sunderland in the past and things like that. But I actually think he did really well last season. I actually think he won over a lot of the Newcastle fans as well. He got them playing a decent brand of football. There was obviously lots of comparisons to where Rafa Benitez was at a particular point in the season. And I actually think on par, Steve Bruce did about as well as Rafa would have been able to do with that team. I think for Newcastle in terms of last season, I think, towards the end of last season, the whole takeover thing was an absolute shambles, and I think it's something that will really affect Newcastle. I think obviously the fans got their hopes up that finally they can get rid of Mike Ashley and that whole kind of saga and that chapter of the Newcastle story, but it continues. And that means, continued frustration for the Newcastle fans. I really, really do feel for those fans. They're great fans. They really do support and love their team. And they really, really deserve a kind of hierarchy and leadership that really gets behind that team. But they have made one signing, and that is Jeff Hendrick from Burnley. It's a bit of a strange one, kind of a player moving from one mid-table team to another. Without sounding cynical, I would probably say money is the reason why. Because, Burnley and Newcastle are about par. Burnley finished higher than Newcastle and arguably will probably finish higher again this season as well. I think Joe Linton will be better this season than he was. I think we saw glimpses towards the end of last season that he is kind of getting used to the Premier League, scoring a few more goals, etc. And Almiron as well, once he got that duck off his back about scoring, seemed to get better as well. And I think they'll do really well. I think they'll avoid a relegation battle because they're fairly solid at the back. Jamal Lascelles is a very, very good defender. I do like him. And that's why, for me, I think Newcastle will be finishing in 13th. So next up is the Blades and Sheffield United. Last season was huge for them. Like one of the best newly promoted seasons in Premier League history, I think. Finishing in 9th position. Could have finished high. They were in with a shout of possibly getting European football for a long part of the season. Yes, they kind of tailed off a bit towards the end after the restart, but a lot of teams did that, even Liverpool included. So I can't really blame them too much. Chris Wilder did an absolutely fantastic job with the team. They set up with a particular system. They didn't change that system. They knew how they wanted to play. I think goals was what they struggled with a bit. Ollie McBurney and Jeff McGoldrick weren't the best. I think Lys Mousset was probably their best striker and the guy who got a lot of the goals that essentially helped them get to the position that they got into. But... and here's the thing about Sheffield United. I think towards the end of last season, particularly after the restart, we saw some cracks starting to form in that Sheffield United team. We saw defensively, they weren't as solid before. And that's why they were so good at the beginning of last season, because defensively, they were just like an absolute rock. And we saw some signs of the kind of second season syndrome that we've seen and heard about in the Premier League before. And I actually, unfortunately, think Sheffield United are going to fall into that trap. I think it's going to be a really, really tough season for them this year. I think teams have found out how to play against them now, how to break them down. And I think whereas sticking to the way they played in the first season was good, Chris Wilder's going to have to adapt, I think, this season to keep Sheffield United up. And I think it's going to be a tough season, but I do think they will stay up. And that's why, for me, I predict that Sheffield United will finish in 16th position. So next up is the Saints, and that is Southampton. Last season, they finished 11th. We talked about teams that don't have many ups and downs in a season, and Southampton, the complete opposite of that. Southampton had so many ups and downs last season. It was crazy that they even could stand up and know which way to go and which goal to score in. Obviously, the highlights for them last season were the negative highlights of that 9-0 defeat to Leicester. But then, more importantly, the rest of the season was just one big highlight reel, I think, for them. They really turned it around after that game. They could have capitulated and felt sorry for themselves and essentially got relegated because they were that bad when they lost to Leicester 9-0. But they turned it around. Ralph Hasenhüttl, just, I don't know what he did with the team, whether it was just motivation, whether it was tactics. I don't know what, but he really, really turned that team around. And a big part of that was Danny Ings. He was absolutely mega up there fighting for the golden boot. We always knew he was a good striker when he was at Burnley, even when he was at Liverpool, when he was plagued by injuries. And now that he's gone to Southampton, and he actually really had focused time in the team, no injuries or anything like that, he proved how good and lethal of a striker he actually is. And I think he'll continue to do that this season as well. They've obviously signed Mohamed Salisu as well, who is a defender. I think even though Ralph Hasenhüttl, they got better defensively as the season went on, he knows that's still one area that they want to improve on and that they need to get better in. And so I think that'll be a great win for him. I think I've seen some highlights of Salisu, and he looks like a pretty good, solid centre-back who's quick as well. And those kind of players always do really, really well in the Premier League. And that's why, for me, I think Southampton will have a very, very solid season again. And I think they'll do a little better than last season. And I think they'll finish 10th. So next up is Spurs and Tottenham Hotspur. Obviously, last season, as it was very similar with Southampton, it was very down, and it was kind of mediocre, and it was kind of a bit up. But I think on the whole, I think they ended the season with a positive trajectory. Obviously, the highlights of last season was kind of everything off the pitch, really, with the whole Christian Eriksen, Jan Vertonghen thing, with Poch getting sacked and then Mourinho coming in. That's a lot of change for a Spurs team that has fairly stayed kind of fairly static in terms of their ins and outs and kind of things throughout the season over the past couple of seasons. And it definitely obviously led to them finishing sixth. I think they could have done a lot better, but given the start of the season they did have, sixth was actually a very, very good win for them. They've tried to address some of their challenges that they faced last season in terms of a good backup for Lloris. I don't think Vorm is good enough, and they've signed Joe Hart, which is an interesting signing. Obviously, his career's taken a bit of a hit over the past couple of seasons. Once he kind of left Manchester City, his career's kind of not really gone anywhere. So hopefully he can resurrect it at Tottenham Hotspur, because I do think he's a decent goalkeeper. They've also signed Højbjerg from Southampton. I think this signing is a really interesting one, because obviously we've seen the issues that Mourinho's had with Ndombele, and obviously we've got Harry Winks and Moussa Sissoko who play in that kind of defensive midfielder position, but none of them are really a defensive midfielder. Harry Winks wants to get forward, play the ball. Moussa Sissoko the same, wants to drive forward, take on people, and so I think Højbjerg is actually a really, really good addition to the team. And also they're looking at buying Doherty as well from Wolves, to challenge Serge Aurier, who I think they got a bid from as well from AC Milan. So he's again another player going forward. Serge Aurier, really, really good. Defensively, very suspect. I think in terms of this season moving forward, obviously the two big plays for them are going to be Harry Kane and Heung-min Son. They're two best players by a country mile. And if they can keep them fit, Harry Kane we know will score goals. We can completely write off that can Harry Kane do it every season now. We know he can do it every season, and I'm sure he'll be there or thereabouts if he stays fit in terms of the Golden Boot race. I think the biggest challenge that Mourinho is going to have is defensively, with Jan Vertonghen, Alderweireld getting on a bit. Davinson Sanchez is probably one of the first choice defenders now, but even he's a bit suspect. And I think that's going to be a big struggle for Tottenham this season. But if they can get that right and they can have a solid season defensively, there's no reason why with that strike force that they can't do well. But I think ultimately those defensive frailties are going to cost them in terms of getting a top four position, and that's why I think Spurs will finish fifth. So next up is West Bromwich Albion, the final of the promoted teams from the Championship, finishing up in second place. Slaven Bilic having his kind of second bite of the cherry in terms of managing in the Premier League. Obviously didn't have the most successful spell at West Ham. It wasn't disastrous, but it wasn't the most successful. So hoping this time, now that he's got a team that really is his and he's worked with for a long time, will do really, really well in the Premier League. Honestly, I haven't really watched West Brom too much, so it's I would struggle to really kind of comment on the way they play. I think what I've seen of them, though, particularly towards the end of the Championship, is that I think they'll struggle in the Premier League. I think the team, I don't know, it doesn't look like they're really strong in the spine. I think down the middle of the team, I just don't feel that they've got the strength or the goals in them really to stay up, and I think it's going to be a really, really tough season for West Bromwich Albion. Obviously, they've turned Matias Pereira's loan deal into a permanent deal. He was a really, really good player for them last season. And yeah, as I said, I think it'll be a real struggle from West Brom, and unfortunately, I'm going to predict that they're going to finish bottom of the bunch. I think they're going to finish in 20th position. So next up is West Ham. Obviously, last season they finished in 16th position, which was probably in the end of it, everything all said and done, I think 16th place was a very, very good position for them. They very much stumbled across the line. Antonio pretty much just dragged them all. Didn't have a car crash of a season like he did with his Lamborghini, but he did really, really well in the Premier League to actually guide them to safety, essentially, with his goals and kind of just dragging the team forward with his hold-up play and things like that. I think in terms of last season, there were lots of West Ham players who I was very, very disappointed in. Lanzini I was disappointed in. Fornals I was disappointed in. Felipe Anderson I was disappointed in. Great players I'm mentioning there. All had horrendous seasons, and West Ham haven't looked to make any signings to address some of these areas, particularly defensively, where they looked a bit weak. But you know, I'm just hoping and expecting that all of those players that I mentioned don't have as bad of a season as they did last season, because they were just horrendous. They did nothing. They didn't work for the team. They didn't create any chances. And yeah, I really, really do think those players will step up. And I do think a lot of those players have class. So I do think they will step up. And I think it will be another tough season for West Ham. But I do think they'll stay up. And that's why I think they'll finish in 14th position. And guys, finally, Wolverhampton Wanderers. They again had a fantastic season. A season that started in July of 2019 and finished in August of 2020. Crazy season with the Europa League. Like, they've had arguably one of the longest seasons in history. And I think that'll play a bit of a toll on them this season. But obviously from last season, their highlight was that Europa League run. Fantastic Europa League run. Haven't seen a Europa League, a British team kind of progress that far in the Europa League that isn't one of the biggest, kind of like an Arsenal or Chelsea, who probably should be in the Champions League for a long, long time. So fair play to Wolves. I think for them also a big win and thing they discovered last season was the importance of and the rise of Adama Traore. We always knew he had potential. We knew he had pace. But last season is really where he put everything together. He put his pace and directness together with a quality final ball. And he just showed how much of a menace he could be to not only defenders in the Premier League, but defenders in Europe as well. Obviously, he's also got his call up to the Spain squad as well. So they recognise the importance that he could play. And he's just something different that you get from other type of wingers. He's not a slight winger like a Di Maria or someone like that. He's a winger that will bulldoze through you. Yeah, I think he'll continue to have another really, really good season, because as much as you can try and stop him, if he's going to run through you, he's going to run through you. There's very little that's going to stop you. I think a fight between Adama Traore and Leon Goretzka would be a very, very interesting fight. In terms of signings, though, for Wolves, they've obviously signed Ainsley Maitland-Niles from Arsenal. Maybe we talked about with Spurs, Doherty possibly going to Spurs, and maybe that's Wolves signing a player already who can play in that kind of either right wing back or right midfielder position to possibly place Doherty if he does go to Spurs. But other than that, I don't expect any new kind of signings. And I think for them, actually, keeping hold of Raul Jimenez is a huge thing. I'm surprised that we haven't heard more rumours about bigger teams trying to come in and get Raul Jimenez. I think that's just because they know Raul Jimenez, loves the manager, loves the team, loves the way they play. It's all kind of set up around him. He gets the opportunities to score. He's the main man. Whereas if he goes to somewhere like maybe a United or somewhere like that he may not be that man. And I think him staying fit and him scoring goals is going to be huge to the success of Wolves this season. Towards the end of the season, particularly after the restart, they did start to look a little bit shaky at the back. But obviously with Connor Cody, Willy Bolly, and Ryan... And is it Ryan Bennett? No, not Ryan Bennett. Who else is the third centre-back? I can't remember who the third centre-back is, but they have a pretty solid relationship at the back there for Wolves, and they continue to play in the same way, with Rui Patricio doing really, really well in goal as well. And for me, I think they'll have another very solid season, and that's why for me, I predict they're going to finish in 7th place. So there we have it, guys. Those are my Premier League predictions for this coming season. Let me know down below who you think is going to finish in the top 4, who you think is going to get relegated. I'd love to hear your guys' opinions. I'll obviously, at the end of the season, do a reaction to this and see whether my predictions were completely wrong or whether I, by some means, have got a magic ball and have predicted all of the Premier League places where teams finish. But thank you guys for watching this episode. Hope you enjoyed these Premier League predictions. If you want me to do more types of episodes like this and videos like this, let me know. I'm happy to do that. But as always, guys, subscribe if you're not already. Make sure you drop a like as well, and I'll catch you on the next one.